After fierce battles at Bogodohov and Akhtirka, the front line was moved by the mighty September offensive flow to the grey Dnieper. Hitler's command staked on the Dnieper and the eastern rampart being built along it, which was ordered to be defended at any cost. A lot was written about the impregnability of this rampart, and Kiev became the main defense hub of the Nazi army. The breakthrough of the rampart near Kiev threatened the entire southern grouping of the enemy, opened the way to Poland and the Carpathians. Our Voronezh front, renamed the First Ukrainian Front, had to force the Dnieper and seize a bridgehead on the right bank for further offensive. The liberation of the capital of Ukraine, Kiev, was not only of great military, but also of great political importance, and the front command began to take measures to preserve the city from destruction. The 207th Battalion was stopped in Krasilovka. Here we received the task to prepare for demining Kiev. A large amount of explosives was to be extracted from the buildings and structures of the 1,000-year-old city in order not to allow to distort what could still be preserved. We studied the plans of the city and its descriptions. We practiced finding time mines. We trained miners in defusing surprises. But the liberation of Kiev was somewhat delayed, and we were taken out of combat training. It was not possible to cross the Dnieper from the start. The offensive of the 3rd Guards Tank Army from the captured south of Kiev Bukrin bridgehead was not successful, and the troops were preparing to strike the main blow from the Lutezh bridgehead, north of Kiev. The Lutezhsky bridgehead was captured by the 240th Rifle Division of the 38th Army by October 7, 1943. Here there were heavy, unequal battles with Hitlerites. It was urgent to transfer tanks and artillery to the bridgehead, without which the infantry was suffocating. In these conditions began the construction of a bridge crossing across the Dnieper in the area of Svaromy, Vyshgorod, and our battalion was ordered to urgently arrive at the Dnieper. Passing burned villages and blown-up bridges, we came to Darnitsa. Only a wide ribbon of white-grey water separated us from Kiev. The metal trusses of the blown-up chain bridge, bent like tree branches, were collapsed into the water. This was the end of the last thread that connected the left bank with Kiev. Ahead, almost next to it, was the ancient city. It seemed that it had risen from its heights and was about to fly over to us. The unique silhouettes of churches and bell towers of Kiev Pechersk Lavra were sometimes covered by the smoke of fires. It seemed as if the ancient churches were shuddering, seeing how the fire was destroying the city. Kiev was close, and at the same time unreachable for us. Along the left bank of the mighty river the battalion came to the small village of Svaromy, whose half-broken and abandoned huts grew into low sand dunes. Here we received orders to begin construction of a bridge in conjunction with the 268th Army Engineer Battalion of the 38th Army. And the companies of our battalion, without wasting time, got involved in the work. At night on pontoons, ferries and folding sapper boats near Vyshgorod, which is north of Kiev, people, weapons and food were ferried. Hitlerites destroyed or stole the boats and barrels before retreating behind the Dnieper. Even logs they let down on the water, and the mighty Dnieper easily carried them downstream. The experienced enemy could not underestimate the importance of the construction of the bridge crossing that had been started. The axis of the bridge ran from the village of Staroslai on the left bank of the Dnieper to Mezhigorye on the right bank. It was practically impossible to hide the works. Front chemists put up smoke screens, but they interfered more with our sappers than with the enemy observers, and try to camouflage a bridge 530 meters long, when the place of its construction is already detected by the enemy. Still hoping to destroy our troops on the bridgehead and to fix the boundary of the eastern rampart, Hitler's command unleashed the full force of its artillery and aviation on the bridge. To move the crossing to another place it meant to give up the success in forcing the Dnieper and sacrifice hundreds more lives of people who were on the Lutezh bridgehead. Failure with the bridge seemed imminent. This at first made the men uncertain, but they, though agonizingly, overcame it. The work that had been suspended was resumed. The bridge was built slowly, with inhuman persistence. The bridge crossing consisted of two parts separated by a sandy island. On the fairway of the river, because of the strong current and considerable depth, it was decided to arrange the floating part from the wooden bridge pontoon park DMP 42. Day and night we could hear the clatter of hand barbers, axes, sledgehammers. And just as methodically, day and night there were explosions, whistling of artillery shells, splashes of water. With the dawn over the bridge regularly passed in pairs of skittish messers. They dropped bombs and showered us with lead. Everyone who was on the bridge froze, huddling against the girders. There was nowhere to run. That's when everyone became convinced it was all a matter of chance. How many times it happened there you were unharmed, but your comrade was killed. Some were knocked into the water by the blast wave. Others jumped themselves. And in October the waters of the Dnieper are so cold. The anti-aircraft gunners were hitting the messers, and the chemists on the banks were lighting smoke bombs. In the smoke one could not see even one's own hands. And only after the thick veil had dissipated could it be determined who was killed and who needed medical attention. The soldiers were slightly deafened by the endless explosions and had little reaction even to the cannonade. 2 companies of our battalion were put on the boycott of piles. 2 or 3 log piles were driven into place with the help of ropes. A strong current pushed the piles out of the water. Again and again this operation was repeated. Wet with sweat, in the freezing wind, the teams changed every 10 minutes. The 3rd company served on the bridge piles and runs. More than once soldiers fell on the slippery runs under the weight of huge logs, and the bridge slowly but persistently grew. On the left and right banks of the bridge, slanty trestles were thrusting towards each other. Minutes turned into hours. Days were replaced by nights, but neither hours nor calendar were the measure of time at that period. It was defined by meters and meters, which were not enough to close the ribbon of the bridge. On the 3rd or 4th day of construction, the situation heated up to the limit. Our command pulled up significant forces of anti-aircraft artillery and aviation to cover the bridge crossing. But the fascists in turn intensified fire raids and bombing. Through the rumble of explosions on the bridge was heard and the rumble of tanks, accumulated nearby in anticipation of the crossing. The river was boiling with red-hot metal falling into it. That's when the words came to mind: Riv T stom Dnieper wide. In this groan and roar of battle, a skinny officer, who spoke quietly and calmly, looked unusual. It was the commander of the 268th Army Engineer Battalion, Captain Irakli Nikolaevich Tsitsishvili. When our battalion came to him for reinforcement, he long thought over the scheme, how best to use the companies. Then, apologizing for the hectic working conditions, he differentiated the tasks of the battalions. Captain did not look at all like a combat commander who found himself in the center of major military events. His oval, pale face with a thin, chiseled nose and narrow black moustache illuminated a faint smile. He spoke with emphasized politeness even in moments of bombing. Being an architect by training, Tsitsishvili easily drew schemes showing the bridge's construction and the order of deployment of units. These sheets from a notebook were written orders to carry out the work. Approaching commanders of formations and units, grumbling, demanded to speed up the readiness of the crossing. Combat calmly parried their claims, and only more and more pale at this. If the attack continued, Tsitsishvili discreetly said, "Excuse me, I have to go to the bridge," and walked towards the explosions of shells fleeing from the just, but unrealizable at that moment demands of the army commanders. The bridge trestle, reinforced with side piles braces, was finally finished. The floating part made of wooden pontoons was hardly brought into the bridge line. Chief of Engineers of the 38th Army, elderly General N.N. Krizanov, allowed to start test loading. Passed the first loaded car, the second, the third. Then the load increased, let a car with an artillery system, Sao-76, finally a T-34 tank. Tsitsishvili conducted surveillance under the bridge. The captain heard how the bridge creaked, saw how slowly lowered the marks on the piles that went into the ground under the ever-increasing load. Then the draught paused, and our battalion continued to strengthen the supports with struts and braces. And here came the long-awaited moment. The continuous spring of troop columns began to unwind. In the intervals between cars and tanks were soldiers. Parts were rushing to the crossing. And the commandant of the crossing, Captain Tsitsishvili, was already at the dugout on the left bank. He asked us to help the brig to catch logs in the river that could damage the bridge. The captain listened silently to the excited commanders of the units, who were in a hurry to cross the Dnieper as soon as possible, and when his interlocutors ran out of potent arguments, calmly replied, "I can't. There is a schedule of crossing." 24 hours had already passed. Endless columns of tanks, cars, people continued to move along the humpbacked, snake-shaped bridge under fire. General Krisanov arrived again. He congratulated Titsishvili with the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. The high award was deserved. In the hell that reigned on the Dnieper, it was the firmness of Captain Titsishvili and his clear leadership ensured the fulfillment of the seemingly impossible. When Mysyakov, on behalf of our battalion, congratulated Irakli Nikolaevich with the title of Hero and his officers and soldiers with orders, Tishvili was not on a joke embarrassed. "What are you? After all, they were all together. Your awards will probably come later." Almost a year later, when our unit was already in Poland, we learned that the Army Engineering Battalion was suddenly attacked by German tanks near the town of Sanok, suffered heavy losses, and was surrounded. By December 1944, the front line was levelled, the Engineering Battalion was joined with the Army units, and the wounded commander Tsitsishvili was sent to the hospital. Today, Irakli Nikolaevich is a doctor of architecture, professor, head of the department of the Georgian Polytechnic Institute. We entered the Pravo-Berezhny River in the days when the patch was turning into a large Lutizhesh bridgehead. The 3rd Guards tank army of General P.S. Rybolko was concentrating here, secretly transferred from the Bukrinsky bridgehead. Near Vyshgorod there were undefended German minefields. In front of them lay a flat piece of terrain, still strewn with corpses. This pre-bridge fortification then turned into an operational bridgehead. At a high price we got it. At the newly built bridge, at the adjustment points, in the army newspapers, in the leaflets of the political department, everywhere were written in those days 2 words: "Give Kiev." Units and formations continued to pour into the bridgehead. Squeezing the enemy, they dissipated on the terrain. There was an accumulation of troops for the decisive rush to Kiev. The commander of the front, Army General Dnieper, Vatutin, visited the Lutizhesk bridgehead. This further raised the morale of the troops. There were 25 to 30 kilometers to Kiev when the tanks of General Rybolko were introduced. The tanks did not stop moving even at night. Their lighted headlights and howling sirens terrified the enemy. One by one, the defensive barriers of the German troops crumbled on the way of the tankers. Bypassing the enemy from the west, the Soviet tankers cut the highway Kiev-Zhytomyr near Svyatoshino. By the end of November 5, 1943, the units of the 38th Army reached the outskirts of the Ukrainian capital. On the night of November 6, street battles continued. Tankers of the 5th Guards Tank Corps broke through to the center of the city. Hitlerites, fearing encirclement, hastily left Kiev. With dawn after tanks on Kirinevka, the cars of our battalion stopped. We were on the northern outskirts of Kiev. In front of me lay a lovely city of century-old chestnuts and pyramidal poplars, and the great unfulfilled plans of my captivating youth. Kirinevka was razed to the ground, and as if personifying my native Kiev, the first person who met and embraced us here was a decrepit, wounded old man. Looking at him, I experienced an almost physical pain. Taking the scouts with us, we rushed on a trophy amphibian to Pechersk. The streets of the city were deserted. Old neglected houses of Podol, illuminated by fires, battered funicular flashed quickly. Abandoned cars could be seen on the Vladimirsky descent. The famous Kreshchatyk was marked only by piles of bricks. The ruins were covered with wilted grasses, and somewhere even with small bushes. Making our way along the narrow, winding road, pierced among the collapsed buildings, we came to the steep rise of Institutskaya Street. On the right, the huge house of Baron Ginsburg, once considered the largest in the city, was burning down. And again ruins and fires. At the corner of Engels and Karl Liebknecht streets, an old 2-story wooden house was miraculously preserved. In my childhood years, it was a private grocery store. in which hung a poster credit spoils relationships. And on the counter was a thick book, where they recorded the names of customers who took food on credit. As a boy, I entered this shop with trepidation, not knowing whether they would let me borrow money again. And now this miserable little house survived, while large and beautiful buildings were destroyed. However, it happens not only with buildings, but also with people. At the descent to Bessarabka, at 36, Libnata Street, all 6 floors of the beautiful house, where my childhood passed, were burning. Greedily inhaling the air mixed with cinders, I looked for a long time at the huge shield with Hitler's portrait standing next to it. 2 long years Kiev was under the heel of the occupants, but it was a whole epoch. Those 777 days were so terrible. I woke up from a machine gun burst. Our scouts had discharged their machine discs into the shield with the image of the Führer. Opposite, in the back alley of the house, a female figure flashed and rushed towards us with a cry of "Dear ones." I looked and could not believe my eyes, the first person we met in the Pechersk district, and such a familiar face. I recognized in the Kiev woman the daughter of the janitor of our house, Nedzvensky, and immediately I heard that her son was taken away by the Nazis. For this woman, joy and grief were intertwined. While we were tearing down the orders of the German military commandant of Kiev, people with bags and carts appeared in the streets of Pechersk district. These were the townspeople who had been ordered to leave Kiev at the end of October and were returning to their homes and their ashes. On November 7th, we were summoned to the head of the engineering troops of the front, Major General Yuri Vyakoslavovich Bordzilovsky, who temporarily settled in an empty apartment of a surviving apartment building, not far from the Kiev arsenal. The dense, tall, slightly stooped general rose from the table and stepped towards us. Congratulations on a double holiday, the holiday of the Great October Revolution and the liberation of Kiev, interrupted Bordzilovsky report of the combatant, and get right down to business. Unfold the plan. It is necessary to clarify your tasks. The general emphasized not to notice our clumsy haste. 207th Battalion will demine the area where the government offices are located. I will not explain how responsible such a task. I've just come from a member of the War Council. He wants to ensure the safety of the population and the troops. I specify the boundaries of the area of demining battalion, the Dnieper River, Kreshchatik, Krasnomiskaya, Station Kiev, First Commodity, the River Libid. The buildings of the Supreme Soviet and Sovnarkom of Ukraine, Arsenal, Pontoon Barracks, military schools named after Kamenev, and communications, Kiev, Pechersk, Lavra, require special attention. The Chief of Engineers broke away from the map and took a long look at Mysyakov and me, as if he wanted to make sure that we understood every word he said. According to the guerrillas and agent intelligence, the most important facilities were being prepared by the enemy to explode. It is not known what the Nazis had time to do. The main thing is to detect time mines. The so-called infernal machines must be neutralized. I recommend to involve the population to collect the necessary information. Your battalion is attached to company of mine detecting dogs from the 27th Battalion and electrical company from the Battalion of Electric Barriers. Asking if there were any questions, the general instructed us in detail about security measures, and when we began to say goodbye, he exclaimed fervently, "Try to save both people and buildings. After all, this is Kiev." The head of engineering troops of the front visited us in the battalion on the Don and Kursk Bulge. "How do you live, miners?" he used to ask. "Do you know that the Germans use TMI-type mines with bottom fuses? It should be taken into account. It is not excluded the possibility of setting mines for non-retrievability." The general periodically gathered the commanders to make a review of new means of obstruction and methods of mines of the enemy. He concluded the conversation with a reminder that each of us can make cats, and that a hook with a rope is not a complicated but useful technique. In our battalion, Yuri Vyakoslavovich usually stayed for lunch. "Not to have lunch means to offend people," he said. "But I will eat only from the common pot. I'll see, by the way, what you feed your workers." When the commander of the 23rd Infantry Corps, on the basis of an erroneous report of tankers, ordered to remove from command and put on trial the commander of the engineering mine company M. Krichevsky, General Bordzilovsky urgently arrived in the battalion. He came specially because of Captain Khrushchevsky. Colonel Krasnov reported. The question of principle he summarized. He listened to the details of the case. After all, we are talking about the fate of the company commander. And not only that. The organization of interaction between the branches of troops is even more important problem. The general talked to the commander, and he agreed to cancel his order. Captain Khrushchevsky transferred as company commander in the front construction battalion. Nachinj of our front had a great charm. From him it was possible to learn and engineering art, and principle, and care about subordinates. Demining Pechersk district of the city battalion was engaged from the start. This was the task for which we began to prepare in advance, a month and a half before the liberation of Kiev. Our 207th Obiz was given the most responsible and, perhaps, the most interesting area of work with government and military facilities. Arriving in the city, the companies of our battalion on November 6th began to survey the streets for mines. They checked roadways, main streets and entrances to important objects to the factory arsenal, to the buildings of the Council of People's Commissars of the Ukrainian SSR, the Supreme Soviet of the Ukrainian SSR, the People's Commissariat of Internal Affairs of the Ukrainian SSR, the State Bank, military schools, pontoon barracks. Then miners also entered the territory of these objects, the buildings themselves, the rooms. The apparatus of the Soviet and party bodies, which was formed before the liberation of Kiev and followed the advancing troops, joined the work simultaneously with the miners. Within 1 or 2 days, the city and district demining headquarters were established. They included responsible party and Soviet workers, as well as military commandants of the districts. The district demining headquarters were headed by the chairman of district executive committees, who knew well the peculiarities of their districts and industrial and public facilities located on their territory. The 42nd Separate Engineering Brigade of Special Purpose was fully assigned to demining of Kiev, and the head of demining the city was appointed Brigade Commander Colonel V.P. Krasnov. The city was divided into battalion and company demining areas. The most important objects were outlined. The order of work was determined. When Mysyakov and I arrived at the brigade headquarters, located at Prorezhna Street, Colonel Krasnov, coughing, said, "Well, brothers sappers, we are back in Kiev. This is the best medicine. I was sick. I didn't make it to your Pechersk. Don't apologize. I know that General Bordzilovsky clarified the task." Kombrig took a breath and continued, "I will not emphasize the importance of your objects. You have your own heads on your shoulders. You probably have already read in the newspaper our appeal to the population. Tomorrow leaflets about safety measures will be distributed, and you to look for mines, to protect Kiev citizens from them." "We have already started, Comrade Colonel," reported Mysyakov. "On the first day we removed 150 mines. As for the BB, we haven't had time to take into account yet. Are much more explosives in the Kiev land." Sighed Krasnov. "What trials have fallen this wonderful city? More than 2 years ago there were bloody battles here. Then our troops mined the Holozievsky forest and Post-Volinsky and Juliany. And how many mines the Nazis planted? Many of them, perhaps, are still preserved from the 41st year. You, fellow sappers, should also take this into account. By the way, maybe not everyone knows, I want to warn you. On bridges and road junctions along the defense line our units even put radio-controlled landfills." "Wasn't it in Kharkov that radio fuses were first used?" Mysyakov asked. "Not in Kharkov, but here in the capital of Ukraine." "What kind of barricades were not used in the Kiev region?" Colonel Goldovich had enough trouble. "Yes, Comrade Kombrig, the engineers had a tough time then." "I heard about it," confirmed Mysyakov. "And what about the radio fugazes?" "They worked, of course. It puzzled the enemy. He had no such equipment at all." On November 8th, small leaflets were already pasted around the city with a request to the population to report to the district mine clearance headquarters everything that was known about the enemy's engineering works and about places suspected of being mined. Our miners worked 12 to 14 hours a day. Every minute was precious in order to get ahead of the possible explosion of time mines, landmines, surprises, anti-tank and anti-personnel mines. In the conditions of the city, the places of street mines are detected relatively simply by the violation of the clothing of sidewalks and sidewalks, and on the streets mines were not found, reported the commander of the 2nd Mine Engineering Company, D.S. Shigalov, but at the outskirts disarmed 5 groups of TMI-35. We were surprised to find that the enemy used relatively old German round metal mines, TMI-35. They were 2 kilograms heavier than the new TMI-43s, but had a smaller explosive charge. Apparently, these mines had been stored in warehouses somewhere and were only now being issued to enemy troops. Because of the different system of fuses and their mounting on the top cover, these mines had their own peculiarities of demining. We had to urgently report to the brigade about the 3050. In arsenali z piv tons of explosives, Fritz's Bisavidushi Postavili, reported I. Ulko, a tall and full captain, known in the battalion for his economic abilities, and soon appointed assistant commander of the 208th BIS in the economic part. The first findings of miners in the Pechersk district were very alarming. On the objects that caused doubts, signs appeared mined. Entrance is forbidden. Works on detection and neutralization of mines were in full swing. The battalion headquarters was located in the center of the demining area, on the quiet, almost untouched by the war Millionaya Street. We occupied a 2-story corner house. The apartments were deserted. The furniture and some of the belongings were in place, and this gave the rooms a lived-in look. 2 days passed and the landlady came to the apartment occupied by the headquarters. She showed neither surprise nor displeasure at meeting us. In the woman's large black eyes glistened tears of emotion. Clasping 2 little ones and a bag of things, she gasped with joy. Elena Florina, that was the name of the owner, settled down with the children in the neighboring apartment and immediately got involved in the work. As a guide, she led our units to demining sites on unfamiliar streets. She cleaned the rooms, washed and mended our uniforms. It was only late at night that Florina could take care of the children. Pompokov's battalion captain EI. Dorofeev could not stand it. Enough, Lena, you're exhausted. You can't do that. You're replacing 10 men by yourself. No way. Florina took offense. You don't understand anything. I'd like to see you in the crypt at the Baikoi storehouse, like we did. There's nothing to eat. The water's too cold. And then there are raids by Nemesis with dogs. Is it scary to live in a cemetery? So the living are afraid for the dead. 20 years passed. When I came to Kiev, I found the house where the headquarters was located. Only my old neighbor Baranova remembered Lena Florina well. Not long after the departure of the battalion headquarters lived Lena. On December 17, 1943, she and one of the women went down to Bessarabka to get water for the children. German bombers appeared over the city. The women hid, but a dropped bomb exploded behind the fence. A neighbor was killed, and Lena's leg was torn off. The bleeding woman was taken to Alexandrovskaya Hospital. Fiercely she fought for life, but death did its black deed. Boys with whom we played then in the 43rd have long since grown up. The youngest, especially severely traumatized by the war, remained sick for the rest of his life. The older one became a good sailor. He inherited his mother's cheerfulness, love for people, and very touchingly takes care of his disabled brother. And how many such families there were in Kiev. At that time, dozens and hundreds of people came to us on Millionaya Street, offering, like Florina, their help. They decorated pointers, were guides, cleared the rubble. The old artist Sergei Verdi from Gogolevskaya, 46, the sick engineer geodesist Pavel Petrovich Guds from Artima Street, 56, and many other Kiev citizens considered it their civic duty to help the miners. How can I, telling about the war, not remember those who in a difficult moment joined the ranks of fighters? Every day, at dawn, our voluntary helpers from Kiev led the battalion units to new demining sites. Already in the first days, miners of battalion neutralized about 40 explosive surprises. Hitlerites installed them in the most vulnerable places, in furnaces, at pumping stations, in boiler rooms. Winter was approaching, and the disabling of heating networks would cause not only human casualties, but also lead to additional difficulties. On the second or third day of demining, Sergeant Salier's unit disarmed a surprise planted in the pump of a water pump, located near the Dnieper and designed to supply water to the Pechersk district. Only great experience and exceptional concentration of miners allowed to prevent the explosion. Approaching the building of the water pumping station, which pressed against the Dnieper steeps, Sergeant A. Sally and his squad carefully checked the approaches. There was nothing suspicious. True, one of the miners picked up a bronze-threaded bolt as thin as a wire and immediately threw it under his feet again. "What did you throw?" "Give it to me," Sully ordered his subordinate and scrutinized the find. "Yes, this is the safety pin of the German fuse." "Did not recognize it." "Oh, my head!" The unexpected find made the miners to increase their vigilance. If the check is thrown, it means there is also a fuse, and where there is a fuse, wait for a charge. "Stand back, all of you." Sully commanded and approached the door alone. The wide doors opened outward. What if there's a tension surprise installed here? The sergeant peered through the window. Then, kicking out the dirty panes of glass, he climbed through the window opening into the water pump house building. A few tense minutes passed, the door opened and the miners saw their smiling commander with a bronze oblong fuse in his hands. That's right. The charge of 20 kilograms, no less. Even if the door was opened with a cat, then this part of the water pumping station is dead. Having disarmed 2 duplicate fuses of tension action, Sully intuitively felt that it was necessary to continue the search. While the miners of his squad carefully dismantled the standard charges in metal packaging, in which were screwed 2 fuses, the sergeant carefully looked around the room, where there was a large electric motor connected to the pump. "Come on, brothers. Get out of the room," he commanded firmly. "Only Aminov will stay with me. There's a thread in the motor, and a piece of grey material sticking out of the pump blades. It's suspicious. Maybe it's from the uniform of a German mineral." Sergeant A. Sully and Private N. Aminov soon noticed the wires which were attached to the fuse caps screwed into the explosives. When the pump was started, an explosion should have occurred. So the miners saved the lives of dozens of people and kept the water pump from exploding. But they themselves, unfortunately, did not live long. Senior Sergeant Sully on the outskirts of Lvov was hit by a machine gun line, and 6 months later the same fate befell the skinny, tall Red Army soldier Aminov. Both experienced miners died not during demining, but in open combat with the enemy. Another surprise, laid in the boiler room of the Military School of Communications, disarmed mines Sergeant N. Largin. In this building with thick brick walls was once the Military Engineering School, the same school which, as part of the first graduation of cadets in 1922, graduated from our Nachinj front Y. V. Bordzilovsky.
During the inspection of the building, the miners noticed a part of the explosive package thrown near the boiler room. "Look out, guys, keep your eyes open. Fritz might have done something here," Largin warned his men.
There was no surprise at the door. However, the sergeant did not calm down and continued to inspect the boiler room. Only after examining the boiler, he noticed a thin wire. Having bitten it with wire cutters, Largin opened the furnace. Probably the charge is hidden in the coal. Slowly and carefully he removed the coal piece by piece, until a 3-kilogram standard German charge in a metal package appeared. Wiping away the sweat that came from the exertion, the sergeant put a tube over the firing pin and inserted a safety pin, one of those that minesmen wear at their belts. Now it was possible to unscrew the fuse from the charge socket. What a bunch of wise guys, Largin sighed. I don't know what else they could have done with the duplication. And the sergeant began to rake the coal under the charge again. Experience did not fail Largin. Under the 3-kilogram charge he found another wire, which went deep into the coal. Only after disarming the second charge, connected by a flexible wire to the bottom fuse, the sergeant was able to confidently remove the charges from the furnace. Thus another difficult surprise was disarmed. In one of the cool November evenings, The duty officer reported that two elderly men came and asked to listen to them.
Worried and interrupting each other, the old men told about a secret warehouse of explosives, which was located in a cave on the right bank of the Dnieper steeps near Uskold's grave. Together with the platoon on duty, we went by truck to the specified place. Uskold's grave. According to legend, the Kiev Prince Uskold was buried here together with his brother Dieter. The brothers were killed in 882 by Prince Oleg, who accused them of usurping power in Kiev. This legendary place is located on the picturesque slopes of the Dnieper.
Centuries have passed. The cemetery of the Kiev nobility gradually grew near Uskold's grave. It spread far down the slopes. As a boy, I often visited the cemetery, knew every path, every single crypt. On the ledges of the Pridnaprovsky steeps you feel as if floating in the air. Down below, the Dnieper River is leisurely winding its way. Its channels and streams cut the lowland stretching to the horizon. It is breathtaking to see the vast expanse that opens up to the eye. The last time I was in those places was 10 years before the war, before I left Kiev, and when among the thin trees I saw the cemetery area, at the first moment I could not believe my eyes, it had changed so unrecognizably. I could not see the tomb and monuments familiar from my childhood. On semicircular terraces, descending steps lined up rows of grey granite slabs, on which were carved Hitler's iron crosses and tombstone inscriptions in German. In the centre, at the rotunda with a classical colonnade, which replaced the old church, stood a tall granite obelisk. A large bust was mounted on it. The bronze head in a German helmet with horns looked haughtily toward the Dnieper. Eyes were symbolically directed to the east. Around the obelisk one could see large mass graves. Everything here was done well, thoroughly, with the expectation for centuries. But this monument did not last long. Soon after the liberation of Kiev, all traces that reminded of the temporary rule of fascist invaders in the city were erased from the native Kiev land forever. After liquidation of the secret warehouse of explosives on Uskold's grave, the miners of the battalion repeatedly travelled at the call of citizens to check places suspicious of explosions. But the main task of the battalion remained the search for time mines that could threaten the lives of Kiev citizens, as well as the existence of government institutions or military and public facilities. We had no data on the presence in the German troops' radio-controlled devices for the explosion of charges at long distances. Hitler's army, advanced at that time, really did not have them. But we had samples of German secret closures for time mines. These were 21-hour and 32-hour electrochemical devices. And we persistently searched for them. According to intelligence, the most probable was considered the use of clockwork mechanism. As the most accurate and reliable after all, the Nazis still dreamed of retaking Kiev. Clock lock for time mines J. Feder 504 represented a plastic cylindrical case, in the widened part of which there was a clock mechanism. The side window housed discs for setting the closure for a given deceleration time. There were explanations on the discs, according to which the scale with red divisions showed for how many days, and with black ones for how many hours deceleration of explosion was set. The position of the cover and the upper part of the closure body with white and red triangles allowed to determine the degree of combat readiness of the delayed action mine. We with as Cherkashin held special classes on the study of this Fedor, as some officers and sergeants of the battalion jokingly called the clock lock. Let it be Fedor, laughed Cherkashin, but just do not confuse it with combat Fedor Vasilievich. That Hitler's sappers carefully disguised the closures and charges of explosives, there was no doubt, and it demanded from miners special attention and repeated checks. The buildings of the Supreme Soviet of Ukraine and the Council of Ministers of the Ukrainian SSR, as well as other important objects, were checked most scrupulously. When we began the inspection of government buildings, it caught our eye that there was almost no furniture in the rooms. This facilitated the external inspection and listening to the walls and floors with stethoscopes and mine detectors. In some places the floors were opened. Attics and cellars were examined with special care. And the electrical company attached to the battalion checked all electrical facilities, elevators, equipment. But the basements were the most troublesome. It was easy to disguise the charges of time mines there. the explosion of such mines in the basements would be most effective for the destruction of the entire building. The next object of demining was to be the Kiev Pechersk Lavra, the very name of which smelled of antiquity and mystery. Thick fortress walls, erected 9 centuries ago, did not protect the Lavra from the fiery breath of war. Above the main entrance, the peeling and splintered Trinity Church caught the eye. On the large stone slabs, erased by the feet of many generations of believers, we passed into the courtyard of the Lavra. There was not a soul there. Logs, iron from the roof, stone, broken bricks were lying around. In the centre of the square of the upper Lavra, we could see piles of stone blocks and debris. These were the remains of the famous Assumption Cathedral. The back right corner of the cathedral remained intact. The corner tower, with a dome and a column with a dangerously overhanging part of the vault, resembled a tombstone over the ruins of the cathedral. The roofs of all the buildings were destroyed. From the cells of the cathedral elders, the refectory, the Kovnerovsky building, only the walls with dark and empty eye sockets of windows remained. Only the main bell tower, black from the fire and mottled with splinters, proudly pointed upward its almost 100-metre hulk. The laurel has been standing for a long time. Many things have seen its walls. How many times destroyed them? But each time the laurel rose from the ruins. I was helped to reconstruct the events of the period of occupation of Kiev by the former residents of the Lavra Georgy Fyodorovich Kolesnikov, Sergei Zozhulia, and Anton Vasilievich Tregub, the head of the Lavra Museum Reserve. Entering Kiev, Hitlerites during 24 hours did not dare to occupy the area of the Lavra. And when the fascist flag appeared on the bell tower, some of the patriots set fire to the inner wooden structures and steps of the upper tiers of the bell tower the same night. The flag with the swastika was burned. Later, the wooden constructions of the upper tiers of the bell tower were set on fire again. Hitlerites were forced to install a machine gun on the bell tower, and the flag was hung below, on the ledge of the 4th tier. In one of the weatherful autumn days of 1941 to the site, fenced by a high retaining wall of the descent to the lower Lavra and the building of the corps. No. 30, which old-timers called Vid for the fact that from there was clearly visible Dnieper, approached about a dozen cars. Several German officers and the general looked at the endless left bank distances from the platform for a long time. Suddenly there was a strong explosion and Vid was gone. All Hitlerites died. The retaining wall collapsed on the road leading to the lower Lavra. The occupants were overexcited. On the same day, from the territory of the upper Lavra, the rear part and the headquarters of one of the divisions located there were withdrawn on alarm. German miners began a thorough check of the Lavra. In a tiny square near the bell tower, all the male population of the Lavra was gathered. There followed a ban to live in the buildings of the upper Lavra, and the tenants were forced to urgently leave the territory of the monastery. 2 days later, a new explosion shook the structures of the Lavra. It was the enemies who destroyed one of the most ancient monuments of Russia, the Assumption Cathedral. Maybe it was revenge for the explosion of Vid. Whether the German miners did not have the courage to penetrate into the underground vaults of the Assumption Cathedral, or they never found out that in 1941 in these basements were hidden great values, which could not be evacuated to the interior of the country, but the Nazis never plundered them. And it is not by chance that after the war, during the excavations, precious royal and princely offerings to the monastery, gold-embroidered vestments, gift boxes and various church utensils were extracted from the ruins. During the excavations, which were carried out near the graves of Kochubey and Poltava Colonel Iskra, executed by Mazepa, were found scraps of a sapper guide. According to the description of A.V. Tregub, who was present at the excavation, it can be assumed that they led to the retaining wall and were obviously used for the explosion of landfills. Perhaps this was the secret of the explosion of Vid. When the blown-up retaining wall was restored, a German car with Hitlerites' corpses was found under the debris. Not far away they found the remains of a Soviet soldier. Maybe it was a miner who made the explosion? This question will probably remain unanswered. Only one thing is clear: it was another of those unknown heroes of war, which our country is so rich in. Are there mines in the catacombs of the Lavra? We had to check that too. leaving a unit of miners to examine the place where Wide used to be and the nearby 2-story building No. 30 with a mysterious 4-story underground part of the building, we moved towards the lower Lavra. A figure in a black cassock flashed and disappeared under the curved retaining arches that spanned from the Kovnarovsky building to the site of the vid and miraculously survived the explosion. We went down the steep cobbled road and went around the rubble formed by the explosion. On the slopes of the mountain, between the thick inner fortress walls and the orchards devastated by the fall and war, a few buildings were nestled between them. A fat monk, startled by our appearance, evidently wanted to hide, but we stopped him, and he led us to a terrace on a slope near the white stone church of the Exaltation of the Holy Cross. Here we saw 3 bearded men in black cassocks with large crosses. They had evidently been warned of our coming and were waiting for the conversation to begin. Saying hello, I asked to be escorted to the most senior of them. "What can I do for you?" A tall monk with sly black eyes muttered in reply. "This is the abbot of the monastery," Father Valery said, a grey-bearded man standing nearby.
We have received the task of demining the Lavra.
Don't worry. The Germans did not mine the lower Lavra. And the caves. The caves too. Near and far? Near and far. But it's your right to be sure, he added after a pause. Father Fielant will order it. In the 500-metre underground galleries of near and far caves we were accompanied by the guardian of the caves, armless Kalainik John, and a gloomy old man monk. Candles were brought, and we descended into a wing of the Church of the Exaltation of the Holy Cross. "You can't go into the church with weapons," the old man said angrily, looking back at the acolyte. "We are not allowed without weapons," I explained without stopping. The bright light of our portable battery lanterns illuminated the winding vaulted galleries. Bristling with assault rifles, mine detectors, and feelers, a small group of miners moved gingerly through the narrow passages. The cast-iron slab floors made it impossible to use the mine detectors. A fabulous, improbably mysterious world opened before us, the tiny underground church of the entrance, connecting galleries, ascents, descents and dead ends. In a few places we encountered small collapses, and again there were niches with saints in glass coffins, stone bags with relics. There were icons by the tombs. Dim lamps burned in some places. Under the glazed lids were visible dried heads and hands, vaguely outlined outlines of bodies covered with red velvet blankets with gold embroidery. These were the famous caves Pechersk, from where the names Kievo, Pecherskaya, Lavra, Pechersky district, were derived. Even distant ancestors dug their dwellings in the slopes of the high right bank of the Dnieper. Here in the labyrinth of caves they buried their neighbours. Dry soils and constant temperature promoted natural mummification of corpses. The miners checked all the nooks and crannies. But what about the coffins? They could contain time mines along with the holy relics. They demanded to open some coffins. "Don't blaspheme," shouted the old monk. But looking at the majestically calm guardian of the caves, crossed himself and prayerfully opened 2 coffins on our instructions near the underground church of St. Varlam. Beneath gold-embroidered velvet covers lay leather-covered skeletons. At the third, a small coffin-shaped box containing the relics of some holy infant, the monks faltered. We became wary. When the box was opened, it revealed bones and crumpled sawdust. The relics, it turned out, were undergoing restoration. In the distant caves beyond the ravine, there had been a lot of cave-ins. We found neither mines nor people hiding there. According to the monks, the Nazis avoided visiting the caves. Obviously, they were afraid not so much of the holy saints as of the punishing hand of the Soviet patriots who could strike in these catacombs. Far. Valery told us the truth: there were no mines in the Lavra. Kiev was demined by units of our brigade from November 6th to December 5th, 1943. This 1-month period coincided with the period of compulsory mine quarantine, during which time slow-acting mines could work. All demining works were carried out in a difficult situation of the enemy counter-offensive and intensive bombardment of the city from the air. Therefore, our battalion, as well as other parts of the brigade, was in the reserve of the Chief of Engineering troops of the front. When the situation became extremely aggravated, the battalion, with the exception of Company DS Zhigov, left for demining Pechersk, was urgently sent to mine south of Kiev. Our miners did not work in Kiev in vain. Dozens of mine surprises were removed, many hundreds of mines were neutralized, a large amount of explosives and blasting equipment was collected, and most importantly, at least several hundred human lives were saved. The number of buildings and constructions saved from destruction is counted by tens, and all this only in the Pechersk district. The main emphasis in demining the city was on finding time mines. But, as it turned out, the enemy never had time to install them. Hitler's orders on the defense of the eastern rampart and the enemy's efforts to throw our troops from the bridgehead into the Dnieper put the German fascist command in a delicate situation. It made no sense to mine the city, which they were forbidden to leave by the Führer. Besides, there were not enough sappers. They were used mainly in battles near bridgeheads, and nevertheless the works on mining of Kiev were deployed by Hitlerites. In the Pechersk district, for example, we found numerous traces of preparatory activities preceding the installation of MZD and partially executed by the enemy. Opened excavations, dismantled walls, and in some places large charges of explosives. All this confirmed the data of our intelligence. Apparently, only the rapid advance of the Soviet troops did not allow the enemy to realize his plans, forced to stop the mining of a number of urban objects. At the same time, the study of the preparatory activities carried out by the Nazis showed that the German sappers weaker than we knew special mines. Checked. No mines read hundreds of signs that appeared on the streets of the city. These words confirmed that the safety of Kiev citizens was ensured. Autumn of 1943 was not in a hurry to enter its rights. Indian summer reigned in nature, and although the roads were not dry after the past rains, clear, warm days were established. The sun was peeping cheerfully into numerous roadside puddles. The urgent packet with the order about the battalion's performance took us by surprise. Work on mine clearance sites was in full swing. The soldiers found a German 21-hour clockwork, disarmed one after another several other explosive surprises. All this was alarming. And here, the order prescribed to leave on demining the Pechersk district only one engineer mine company Zhigulov. The rest of the battalion was raised at night on alert to march to the area of mines, the front line of defense south of Kiev. The situation was once again becoming more complicated. Urgently regrouping the troops, Hitler ordered to launch a powerful counteroffensive on Kiev. The fascist generals did not give up hopes for the elimination of the Kiev bridgehead and hoped to throw our units into the Dnieper. The configuration of the bridgehead resembled a wedge, driven to a depth of 150 kilometers. And the Nazis made every effort to cut this wedge, to get to the Dnieper, and to restore on its right bank the defensive eastern rampart. To achieve this goal, 8 tank and motorized, as well as 7 infantry divisions made strong blows west of Fastov and south of Zhytomyr. The most difficult situation was created in the strip of the 38th Army, which was on the left flank of the Kiev bridgehead. Its front stretched for 200 kilometers. Between the flanks of the 23rd, 21st and 51st Rifle Corps, there were gaps not occupied by the troops. These gaps reached 14 to 16 kilometers. Stubborn counterattacks of Hitlerites on the section Fastov, Tripoli gave away their intention to cut a wedge by a blow from the south along the Dnieper. Our battalion was to cover the approaches to Kiev with mines on this line near Tripoli. There was no time. But the battalion commander had long ago learned one of the front truths: if you can't ensure the timely arrival of the battalion, appear on time yourself. While you get the task, organize interaction, and the battalion will come. Following this front commandment, the commander and I left Kiev at night on a small amphibian. At dawn on November 13th, we reached the outskirts of the village of Stary Bezrodichi by the road, which was soggy after the rains, and immediately looked for the Corps Engineer Lieutenant Colonel N. Pokuev. We arrived on time. He met us. The commander is pestering us. Where are the miners? We have no forces. All hope for mines. Where are the companies? Company convoys with Captain Barabashov are still in Kiev. They'll arrive by noon. So there's an elderberry in the garden, but there's an uncle in Kiev? Lieutenant Colonel flared up. I wonder what our commander will say about it. And Pokoev led us to a large wooden house, formerly a school or a village council, which housed the headquarters of the Corps. The 8th Guards Tank Corps was commanded by a young-looking Lieutenant General A.F. Popov. That's how you are, Major Mysyakov. With a smile on his tired face, he interrupted the combatant's report. We are waiting. We are very much waiting. I'm just gathering the commanders. Sit down. The commander and I sat down, and the general again leaned over the map, listening to the report of the intelligence officer. When everyone gathered and unfolded the maps, the Corps commander, fighting shortness of breath, began leisurely. The situation is complicated. From the south comes up to 2 German corps. In front of us, presumably the 24th TC. His divisions are already beaten by the Soviets, but up to 100 tanks they will gain. What about us? If we ask the commanders, they'll tell us 6 or 8 of them. And the commanders' tanks. All in all, there are 3 dozen in the corps. And behind us is Kiev, Ukraine's capital. I'll tell you straight, I'm not going to withdraw. Listen to the order. Bending over the map again, General Popov began to set combat tasks for the brigades, then came to the engineering support. Our salvation now is in anti-tank fire and mines. Artillery behind the minefields to put on direct fire. The mines along the Stugna River will be carried out by an attached battalion. Combat, how many mines do you have? 300 anti-tank, reported Mysyakov. 300. Are you here for a wedding? It is supposed, Comrade General, to carry exactly that many in the reserve. Why 300? There is such an order, Comrade General. Ooh, paper souls. You can't stop tigers and panthers with orders. I'll deal with you, engineers. The Corps commander took a breath and threateningly said, provide me with 3,000 mines. Tomorrow.
After setting the tasks, Mysyakov approached the heavy-breathing Comcorps.
Permission to report. Chief of Staff will go to Vyshgorod for mines, and I'll conduct reconnaissance and set tasks for the companies. Agreed. But we must have mines. What else? Can't we add another 24 hours and get some more vehicles? What 24 hours? Negotiate with the enemy to delay the strike. I'll give you the cars. The drivers of the cars assigned to the battalion had already started their engines when a panting liaison officer told me that the general was calling me. Comcorps looked at me good-naturedly. What is your brigade commander's name? Krasnov, he asked, continuing to write. So, my son, if you go through Kiev, hand the letter to him personally. Listen to what I'm writing. Comrade Colonel Krasnov, in order to prevent German tanks from breaking through to Kiev from the south, I ask you to take measures for immediate delivery of 3,000–4,000 mines to your battalion. I thank you in advance for your help. And my signature. It should work. You act wisely too. Rely on your superiors, but do not fail yourself. I'm giving you good advice. Understand. Then God be with you. The general stood up. He smiled softly with eyes reddened from lack of sleep, shook my hand. Many years later, I tried to find this original man. Tankers advised me to seek help from General D. I. Zayev. Yes, I knew Alexei Fedorovich Popov well. Confirmed the general. Alas, we buried him soon after the war. He was a self-made man. The old Don Cossack fought dashingly. He didn't get lost in any situation. Be sure to write about him. On the territory of the former Lutyish bridgehead near Vyshgorod, where I arrived for mines, everything looked almost unchanged. Only now there was not a single living soul left here. Minefields, which covered the Hitlerites' defence, were hastily fenced with wire. And next to them there were still decomposing corpses. They were afraid to approach them because of mines. We started to remove these mines in order to fulfill the order of the Tank Corps commander. The situation around us made us gloomy. Heavy rain clouds overhead did not help to lift our spirits either. Only Senior Technician Lieutenant A.S. Cherkashin seemed serene against this background, on whose lean and white-browed face a slightly mocking smile occasionally peeped through. Carefully stepping, he passed from fighter to fighter. He would bend over, showing how to check for the bottom fuse. Sometimes he sent a subordinate aside and himself engaged in the instance of the mine that caused concern. Mine work is an art. Not everyone is given to successfully play his role in it, like to repeat senior technician lieutenant. He spoke a little bit in a raspy voice, so that he could stammer less, and he almost always succeeded. Alexander Sergeyevich Cherkashin joined the army as a civilian engineer. He did not become a builder, and did not aspire to it. But just like architect V. N. Morontsev and other civilian specialists, brought a fresh creative stream to the engineering and mine work. Dreamer and inventor, Cherkashin constantly carried with the ideas of new fuses for mines. Both in life and in technology he remained a romantic. Once he developed a fuse for non-retrievable mines, the ball, when tilted, closed the contacts of two metal plates turned one to the other, connected to a power source. Simple and reliable. A number of his interesting proposals were related to devices for throwing cats, with cables on minefields being demined. In the subordination of the head of engineering and artillery supply battalion, Cherkashin was only one soldier rifle and mine master. And although the senior technician lieutenant believed that he was offended by the staff, he successfully coped with his tasks, using the soldiers who were periodically allocated by our units. Nachart solved business issues in a peculiar way.
Yeah. I wouldn't have thought it, no way, he said enigmatically, in a high-pitched voice.
What are you talking about? The interlocutor involuntarily inquired. And you still ask? Cherkashin exclaimed in amazement. From further conversation it turned out that in one of the engineering mine company in time not formalized documentation for spent mines and explosives. Never raising his voice and never parting with his slightly mocking smile, the chief achieved the exact fulfillment of the established rules. Alexander Sergeyevich liked to philosophize, organically did not tolerate strong expressions, and when the situation allowed, sang a slightly hoarse tenor, perfectly accompanying himself on the guitar, songs, which perhaps, and composed himself. You stood with a flower on your cap. At the fork of military roads. His skinny figure and chivalrous nobility, which manifested itself in everything, involuntarily prompted associations with the famous hero of Cervantes. And it was not by chance that some people kindly called Cherkashin Don Quixote or Don Miner. Generally speaking, I'm not in favor of Don Quixote, joked Alexander Sergeyevich, but without Don Quixote the world would be boring. There, near Vyshgorod, Cherkashin helped us a lot, having provided fast demining, completion and sending of mines to the core. In addition to mines from Vyshgorod, Colonel Krasnov allocated to the battalion tank paper TMB-2. General Popov's task was accomplished. Mines were brought directly to the mined area. Cars were bogged down in the muddy ground. We had to carry the mines to the places of installation. We worked day and night. At first, mining along the river Stugno was conducted in a relatively calm situation. But it did not last long. In 10-12 hours, reconnaissance units of German tank formations came to the mined boundary. From time to time, there was a firefight. In these conditions, it was necessary to force the installation of mine barriers. The first priority task was to prepare for the explosion of bridges. Having arrived at the company of Captain A. I, Ulko, I examined the mined bridges and asked how with the documentation. Drobnitsia, shouted Ulko to the platoon commander, who together with several soldiers finished the calibration of electric detonators and knitting the electrical network of sapper conductor. Shvici, you have to draw up documents. Senior Lieutenant N.S. Drobnitsa, an agile and energetic officer with a slightly elongated face and mocking eyes, answered from under the bridge. Documents. What a marvel. If I don't have time, I'll run to warn the Krauts. Shvedshi, my son. What are you thinking? I'll tell the Tigers to wait, since we haven't finalized the scheme yet.
As soon as Drobnitsa finished his joking tirade, we heard the familiar rumble of approaching German tanks.
Ulko and I ran under the bridge and helped to suspend the electric blast net. Then we moved to a lone artillery battery and took shelter in a trench filled with water. Under the cover of the guns, not so whiny under the spoon, Drobnitsa stayed at the bomber station. The artillerymen opened fire. Armor-piercing 76mm shells flew. They were whistling, encouraging us, see courage, see courage. Why is Drobnitsa pulling? I was worried. The phlegmatic Captain Ulko fidgeted and muttered in reply. So it's Drobnitsa. Bisiv son. The enemy tanks slowed down, sent a few shells at the battery and the bridge, and then began to retreat to the woods. After getting out of the trench, we approached Drobnitsa. What, the net was out of order? Everything is in order, he answered cheerfully. I was just waiting for them to get close. Several more tense hours passed. Corps engineer Lieutenant Colonel Pokuev arrived in the area of mining. He was visibly nervous. How are things? General Popov is throwing lightning bolts. How are the mines? I reported that 1,120 mines have already been put on alert, that 10 bridges are prepared for explosion, that the mining continues. Look at the documentation. It's a race. A race, of course, and the forms should be in full form.
Pokuev's demand was not unexpected. We ourselves have long ago realized from our own experience what is the importance of documentation when we have to search the terrain installed by us or other units of their own mines.
Fixing a minefield and drawing up documentation that can be used to determine its boundaries and, if necessary, to carry out demining is not an easy thing to do. Reconnaissance of areas where minefields were to be laid was usually carried out in the daylight. However, when in contact with the enemy from the trenches or other shelters, landmarks on the ground were poorly visible, even in daylight. When setting a minefield at night, its boundaries were often shifted, the order of the mines was violated. This made subsequent demining very difficult. Still, some commanders underestimated the importance of documents for mine detonation barriers. It's war, and here we have paper bureaucracy. For such an attitude to the case often had to pay dearly. I would like to note that, as a rule, a lot of attention was paid to documentation in engineering units, and the fact that the Corps engineer, despite the complexity of the situation, reminded about the rules of filling out the forms and even began to look through them, was in the order of things. Lieutenant Colonel Pokuev was torn away from checking the documentation by the noise of newly approaching tanks. Take down the minefield fences, he commanded. Soon from the ravine, not far from us, came out of the Tiger. Another iron kraut. Maybe a reconnaissance, suggested Korinj. There were several of our tanks buried in the ground in this area. It was a reliable cover, and ahead of the minefield, about a kilometre, was set a group of mines, blocking the country road and roadsides. Such groups of mines we sometimes called signal mines. Unaware of these mines, the German tankers brought their vehicles onto the road. There was an explosion. The front Tiger, turning around, stopped. Our tank guns started to talk. It quickly became dark, and though in the darkness the enemy tankers managed to evacuate the hit Tiger, the main goal was achieved. The mine barrier helped to delay the German tanks. The next day came the order to withdraw the 8th Guards Tank Corps for reforming behind the Dnieper. Fresh forces came to the Corps' defence strip and to the Vasilkov area. The 207th BIS was also withdrawn from the battles that had already started. But having returned to Kiev, we soon received again the task of mining. December began, and there was no snow. The ground had completely melted from the abundance of moisture. Only tanks could move off the roads. Our battalion was transferred to the operational subordination of the 60th Army of General I.D. Chernyakhovsky. We were to cover with mines the front edge of the 30th Rifle Corps units near the village of Chernyakhovsky. The headquarters car, ahead of the battalion convoy, was approaching Chernyakov. On the left of the narrow road swiftly passed Messrs. The chauffeur, blue-eyed Muscovite, Nikolai Starostin, suddenly braked sharply. Look, no way ours are retreating. Indeed, ahead, to the left and right, were horses with only forepaws, without guns. People were running after them. A truck rushed towards us, hitting a headquarters car with its fender. What the hell? After all, Chernyakov was freed from the enemy. Machine gun bursts of messers whipped at our car. We jumped into the old overgrown trenches. Several leaflets were immediately dropped on our heads. From them we learned that a new powerful offensive had begun, during which Hitler decided to regain Kiev and restore the eastern rampart along the Dnieper. Having stopped the battalion's convoy, the commander and I rushed on an amphibious vehicle to the head of the Army's engineering forces ZI, Kontsevoi. We drove up to one of the clean white huts located near a ravine on the outskirts of a small right bank village. Hearing the noise of the car, Colonel Kontsevoi himself came out to us. A few days ago he had returned from the hospital after being wounded, and his whole appearance said that he had recently come from the rear. As the commander's report, smoothly shaven face 40-year-old Nashinja army gradually turned purple. What kind of fiction? Was all Kontsevoi could manage to say. A pale officer from the army headquarters ran up to us. Chernyakov at the enemy. German tanks have broken forward. The control center is changing its place. That's how it began. In the following days and nights, the situation was such that the situation on the ground far overtook the situation on the commander's maps. The battalion was repeatedly pointed out points for mines, already occupied by the Germans. The enemy attacked mainly at night. His tactics during this period resembled the recent actions of Rybolko's tankers near Kiev. At night, the units of Hitler's 4th Tank Army, moving with lighted headlights and with the howling of sirens, pierced a wide corridor in the fighting order of the 60th Army. During the day, the tanks stopped, but aviation entered the battle, striking at the Soviet troops. It was said that Rommel arrived at our section, who gave Hitler his word to return Kiev. Such rumors seemed likely just by this time. Brilliant military player Field Marshal General Erwin Rommel was completely free from African affairs. After 2 years of daring operations of his tank formations in Libya, Rommel's 80,000th Army was defeated by the Allies in the sands of North Africa. Now, among the advancing tanks, caught cars with camouflage painting under the colours of the desert. Rumours about the participation in the offensive Rommel disseminated, perhaps, in order to frighten us. Not without reason, even Genghis Khan sent ahead of the troops people who spread rumours of his strength and cruelty. Even in those old times, this factor was also used as a weapon. But the rumours remained only rumours. Field Marshal General Rommel did not participate in the battles on the Kiev bridgehead. At that time he was among the conspirators who planned to overthrow the Führer, by whose order he was executed in 1944. And the Nazis kept advancing. We mined forest roads and clearings, covering the withdrawal of our troops to Malin. In the area of Svida, the 207th Obiz put its last mines, but we found ourselves in the rear of the enemy, who bypassed us to the right. Having abandoned several vehicles, we went out by forest trails to Vorsovka. In the documents reflecting the combat actions of the battalion recorded, due to a sharp change in the situation, the battalion got into the zone of breakthrough of enemy tanks, and acting as a mobile detachment of barrages, covered with tin barrages the withdrawal of the units of the 60th Army. In the immediate vicinity of the enemy tanks, the battalion units planted mines on the roads in the Malin area. The enemy lost 4 tanks and 2 armoured personnel carriers on mines. We did not wash our eyes for several days. Not far from Vorsovka, we finally got a chance to sleep in cosy houses of a small village. At night, Mysyakov, Barabashov and I were roused by the duty officer. We jumped up like scolded. Have the tanks broken through again? No. The army's Nakhinj has arrived. Colonel Kontsevoi cleaned his boots from sticky mud in the hayloft for a long time. Then he came into the room. He was visibly gaunt, his eyes swollen, obviously from sleepless nights and tension. The enemy is coming, and you are watching interesting dreams. It won't take long for you sleepy people to get caught. The men are exhausted. The commander started. We've crumbled like paper mines in the water. 3 hours since the encirclement. It's hard, right? That's what war is for. Listen to the new task. We've unfolded the maps. We have to cover the roads to Malin from Detonets, Vorsovka and Viznia with mines. I'll get mines from the army battalion. Form groups of miners tank fighters as part of the mobile barrage squad. Colonel before the war taught military engineering and stubbornly defended the idea that the engineering troops are not only providing, but are able to independently perform combat tasks, including the fight against tanks. The head of the Army engineering troops again and again unexpectedly appeared in the battalion. We were surprised how, in that rapidly changing situation, he found us. The coordinates transmitted by the code over the radio indicated only the area of the battalion headquarters, and they did not remain valid for long. And the pointers we put out were not visible. The colonel checked the fulfillment of his orders. I set new tasks to undermine bridges, set up minefields, arrange rubble with mine surprises. Nowhere, perhaps, with the exception of the Carpathians, when we were encircled there, the battalion was not so physically exhausted. Miners laboured day and night. The men slept on the move and dozed off even while mines were being mined. That is why 2 experienced specialists blew up. It's not the endbringer, it's the infinite. There is no end to his tasks, sadly joked the miners. But everyone understood perfectly well it was not about Nakinji. The situation required him to use the attached battalion with maximum effect. Therefore the colonel could not act otherwise. More than half a year passed. Near Lviv we again met with the energetic chief of engineers of the army. On his uniform shone the gold star of hero for ensuring the forcing of the Dnieper. Noticing our wariness, Convoy laughed. You haven't forgotten the Kiev bridgehead. Yes, we had to chase mines then. The situation was God forbid. That's all right. We were meaner. It came in handy there. Formation of groups of miners tank fighters made me and my commander and Captain Barabashov think. Is everyone able to fight with enemy tanks? We sacredly believed in the reliability of our men, but faith alone is sometimes not enough. The state of their psyche is also important. It is on the psyche depends and the protective reactions of the body to external shocks, and the readiness of a man to feat, and even the manifestation of cowardice. The subtle mechanism of the human psyche, not yet fully cognized, can be paradoxically contradictory. Having endured severe tests for a long time, it suddenly fractures fragilely under an insignificant at first glance blow. S.A. Barabashov called for volunteers. We selected people from among them. Training of miners fighters was conducted on the move. Groups were placed near forest roads, in narrow places of the most probable appearance of enemy tanks. Trenches were prepared and camouflaged in advance, cables with TMI mines fixed on them were stretched. Taking into account the wooded nature of the terrain, each group scouted its own escape routes through the forest after the task was completed. Meanwhile, German tanks for many nights continued to tear toward Malin. Rumbling and shooting at random in the night darkness, they persistently gnawed through our defences. On one of such nights, a Tiger approached the clearing where the position of Junior Sergeant IP. Frolov's fighters was located. Stopping, he sent a shell into the darkness, squeezed on both sides by the dense wall of the forest. When the tank moved forward again, the fighters pulled the cable with the mine. But the mine did not hit the track, and the Tiger remained unharmed. Following the Tiger, several medium tanks with Hitlerites on the armour came to the clearing. Having divided into 2 columns, the vehicles moved to the left along the winding forest road and straight along the clearing to the mines. The fighters began to pull up the mines to the rut laid by the Tiger that had passed ahead. The medium tank that followed it went rut to rut and soon equalled the trench of the miners. There was a double explosion. It was triggered one after the other 2 mines. The tank by inertia rushed forward and stopped helplessly, turning across the clearing. Several paratroopers fell to the ground. The rest of the tanks could not move forward along the narrow clearing blocked by the blown-up vehicle. The paratroopers began combing through the forest. Miners, covered by bushes, began to retreat. They found the battalion already near Malin, and Frolov reported. The tank was hit. 2 mines exploded. How can you prove it? Interrogated the commander. What is the onboard number of the tank? It was not up to the number, Comrade Major. But the fact of tank explosion was confirmed, and Junior Sergeant Frolov was awarded with the Order of Glory of the 3rd degree, which was established only a month before that case. The second group of miners, tank fighters of Sergeant A.G. Risis, acted in the area of Vizny. The guys equipped their positions near the forest road. They also managed to blow up a medium tank of Panther type, which was moving without paratroopers. And after the explosion there was a strong blow. It was the second tank with a move collided with the first. The group of Risis, after a number of adventures, got to our anti-tank battery and found the battalion. All fighters received government awards. The third group of our miners also acted successfully, but one group never returned. Meanwhile, night attacks of tanks did not stop. However, the daily advance of the enemy began to decrease day by day. Parts of the 60th Army, and with them our battalion, withdrew behind the river Arsha, a tributary of Teteriv. Here along the river boundary minefields were set. Before dawn, enemy tanks rushed to the bridges. The company of Senior Lieutenant Alexei Vasilievich Dubrovsky, whose appearance was something gypsy, was preparing for the explosion of a wooden bridge over the Arsha near Malin. "Come on, boys, hurry up," hastened the miners' company commander, shaking the tarry hair that did not fit under the cap ear. "Wait for Fritz any minute now." A strong explosion sounded from the left. In the morning haze it was visible how the segmental metal truss of the railway bridge over Arsha, about 1.5 kilometers away from us, shuddered, shrouded in a grey cloud, and cut, as if by scissors, fell into the river. It turns out that several German tanks jumped out on the railroad bed and went to the bridge. And the bridge truss was prepared for the explosion of the Army Engineering Battalion. Nachinch of the army gave the command to blow up. Half an hour later, ZA. Convoy arrived. "Is the bridge ready for the explosion?" he shouted, without getting out of the truck. "Not yet, Comrade Colonel," Dubrovsky stretched out. "So the tanks will slip through. I give you 5 minutes. If you allow me to concentrate in 2 minutes." On the upper planking of the bridge quickly laid 3 stacks of TMDB mines and stretched a sapper guide to the detonation station. But then several German tanks started to come out of the forest on the road to the bridge. Our artillery, located behind the bridge, opened fire. Sergeant A. Salih, bent down, ran along the bridge to the concentrated charges of mines. He inserted electric detonators of the main and duplicate electric explosive network into the charges. The tanks were closing in. "Explode," shouted Nashims. "Salih, I ready," worried company. "I'll blow up." It was one of those acute psychological moments which often happened in war. 2 of the charges already had electric detonators inserted, and they could be detonated immediately. But at the 3rd charge was still Sergeant Salih. If we delayed the explosion, the enemy tanks would break out on the bridge, knock down the charges, and slip to the north bank of the river. Then many people could die. If you blow up the bridge, one of the best sergeants, selflessly under fire shelling charges detonators, will die. The company commander jumped to the trench of the bomber station. Grabbing the blasting machine in his hands, he did not take his eyes off the bridge. And the tanks were already near. At that time, Sergeant Salih, having completed the task, ran to the shore on the bridge deck. At the moment when he reached the shore, Dubrovsky turned the key of the blasting machine. There was an explosion. Salih, who was not far away, only suffered a contusion. The enemy did not advance further than the river line. Our artillery and infantry, covered by mines, repelled enemy attacks on Malin. Tension immediately fell, and the battalion was removed from the subordination of the commander of the 60th Army. The German counter-offensive on Kiev began to fade. In the 20th days of December fell a lot of snow. But in the afternoon came the thaw. Regrouping of troops was going on the roads. Our battalion was operationally subordinated to the 101st Rifle Corps, which was part of the 18th Army, then commanded by General K. N. Lesilidze. The army was preparing a counterattack on the enemy, who had moved to the defence north of Zitomir Highway. And we were engaged in the second task of miners demining. That's how life is won mines, and then you neutralize your own mines. We had to make passages in minefields in the area of Rakovici, Stavishi. That's when we had to deal with our paper mines TMB2, which were dangerous when soaked. Their round body was made of pressed paper and impregnated with bitumen. In dry weather, such mines were very convenient for installation and quite reliable in operation. Their advantage was also that TMB2 was difficult to detect with a conventional mine detector. The cover of the fuse hole was made of plastic or glass. Only the fuse itself was made of metal. But its mass was so small that it was very difficult for the enemy to find such mines. After a long stay in the water hulls TMB2, slightly soaked, and demining became dangerous. To detonate them in front of the enemy's nose meant to reveal the preparation of a counterattack. The task of miners was therefore very responsible, and the battalion command was constantly in the companies. Fortunately, everything went without losses. On December 25th, the battalion crossed the Zhytomyr highway. We met the new year of 1944 in the fighting order of the advancing units of the 52nd Infantry Corps. It was already dark when we stopped in a burned farm near Brusilov. On the way we clinked mugs and went to sleep in a huge haystack. At dawn the duty officer found a boot with horseshoe shoes sticking out of a neighbouring stack. Dragging the boot, the Hitlerite was dragged out into the light of day. He, apparently, had celebrated the New Year's Eve and was still drunk. Soon they found his drinking companion. Both of them were from the SS tank units, which were part of the division Adolf Hitler. German tankers, dazed by the sudden turn of events, reported that in the nearest ravine is their camouflaged tracked armoured personnel carrier. Well, Chief of Staff, a great New Year's present for you. It's a staff armoured personnel carrier. Folding tables. Radio station. Turov is working there now. Shook my hand, satisfied Barabashov. Junior Sergeant N. Turov, a tall and wiry blonde, used to be a tanker. After a severe wound, as he explained, he was put back together from the pieces. It cost the guy a lot of labour to return to the army. The junior sergeant was sent to us as a commander of a reconnaissance motorcycle squad. And here Turov sat behind the levers of a tracked German armoured personnel carrier. The engine roared. The car obediently approached the truck with a box, which was actually a mobile headquarters. The clerk of the battalion headquarters, energetic and punctual Sergeant A. Onoprienko, rubbing his freckled face, enthusiastically examined the new headquarters vehicle and did not hesitate to transfer there 2 boxes of documents and topographic maps, which made up our entire headquarters. The radio operators of the control platoon quickly installed the radio. Moving forward, we were just about to overtake the columns of parts of the second echelon of the division, as our armoured personnel carrier opened fire. We had to urgently take care of the appearance of the vehicle. 2 red flags were installed on the windshield of the armoured personnel carrier, and white crosses were covered with red stars. Only after that we continued our way, and in the morning of January 3rd we reached the northern outskirts of Berdichev. Although the next report of Sovinformbureau announced the liberation of Berdichev, the fighting in its southern part was still going on. The streets met us with ruins of houses. 2 women told us about the fate of many inhabitants of this provincial town during Hitler's occupation. The earth breathed from the buried, but still alive people, recalled one of them. Beasts, not people. You say beasts, Captain Barabashov turned to the women. But do you know that even wild beasts are not naturally cruel? He asked, frowning his thick, overhanging eyebrows. The predator kills small animals only for his satiation. Only wolves are sometimes an exception. True, deputy, supported Barabashov combat. Tigers and panthers really extra life will not ruin. But the fascist tigers and panthers crush people indiscriminately and old, and small, and a soldier. And what can I say? Picked up Barabashov. Beasts and fight among themselves only for the sake of prey, or in the name of continuation of the species. And cruelty in this case, but the end in itself. Not like the fascists. Is cruelty inherent in man? This question, of course, worried me and many of my fellow soldiers. At that time we did not yet know the whole truth about Hitler's industry of extermination, about Auschwitz and many other things. But there was plenty of what we ourselves met with before and after Berdichev. Of course man is also an animal, only a social one. Barabashov continued his thought. Therefore he should not be characterized by cruelty. You're all academic, Sergei, you say, and better answer simply, in a manly way, why Hitlerites, especially SS, so rampant. Why? Boiled combat. Not a simple question, Fedor Vasilievich. You see, Hitler's top cultivates cruelty as a virtue, as valor, as a victory over his own conscience, which Hitler calls a chimera. This is reflected. The chimera, too, disappointedly interrogated Mysyakov. And she, of course. SS fulfilling the sinister will of the Führer feel unpunished, and many even want to serve on it, to make a career. Understand? I see, but not quite. In my opinion, these vile people just enjoy torturing others. That's right. And there is that, Commander. Among them there are a lot of sadists before whom pale the feats of the French Marquis de Sade. Have you heard of such a man? No, I haven't heard. Well, thank God you haven't. Sergei, you remembered God. They don't forget him either. Even orders in the form of crosses. And on the buckles of soldiers' belts its embossed God is with us. That's the paradox. What other paradox? With annoyance asked the commander. You speak painfully scholarly. And yet the main thing is clear to me, they have for cruelty ranks and orders give, heroes make their scum. That's why the atrocity and flourishes. Here you have God is with us, here you have love for your neighbour. It's all smoke. That's it. Well, that's it. Time to go to the companies. After reconnoitring the northern outskirts of Berdyshev, we found 7 minefields. Senior Lieutenant Dubrovsky's company made passages in them for artillery and surrounded the danger zone with wire. Further searches for mines yielded results. Here is a monster found at the leather factory, reported Zhigalov, showing an unusual mine, cone with 3 magnets. It turned out to be a magnetic mine with a shaped charge. Later we had to face in Berdyshev and Kazatin several more mines of this type. Thanks to magnets they stuck to various metal surfaces and were intended to undermine tanks, bridges, pillboxes. The cumulative notch in the charge concentrated the force of the explosion in a small area and increased its penetrating power. In the centre of the city, not far from a small, unsightly and obviously abandoned church, our soldiers found a group of German anti-tank mines. A common thing. But we were very interested in the church itself, when it turned out that it was named after Saint Barbara. After all, it was in Berdyshev, in the tiny church of Saint Barbara. In March 1850, the marriage of the great writer Honor de Balzac and rich vain Evelina Ganskaya took place. It was already dark when 2 companies of the battalion, having finished checking the main streets, approached the high walls of the ancient monastery fortress. The frost was getting stronger. The small river Nilopiot was covered with a thin layer of ice. Infantry on shields moved to the other bank. Companies began to build bridges on gantry supports. One of the 2 bridges we were building was placed under the high corner tower of the monastery. The bridge was small, only 15 to 20 meters. We could have finished it quickly. But the Nazis were firing from the embrasures of the monastery tower from the rear and did not let us work. Chief of Engineers of the 18th Army Colonel M. Zhurin approached the bridge. Bullets whistled nearby. Clinging to the monastery walls, Nachin silently watched as, dodging bullets, the soldiers put in the icy water gantry supports. Then his tall figure disappeared. A heavy exchange of fire was heard from the side of the centuries-old walls. Then it subsided. Soon the colonel reappeared at the bridge. We had to bring in a small arms unit. Now you will not be interfered with. We must press with the bridge. Indeed, the embrasures in the fortress walls were silent. In the morning, having let the troops through the bridges, we went to inspect this monument of antiquity. Behind the fortress fence, in the citadel, the corpses of Hitlerites were few. Those who survived, obviously left through half-abandoned branched underground passages. Massive corner monastery towers, and to this day rise above the precipice to the river Hilopiot. In the walls of this monastery was the author of the Human Comedy. And when Balzac died a few months after the wedding, Ganskaya moved from Paris here, in the monastery, some manuscripts and books from the personal library of the writer. 10 days passed. Berdychevsky Monastery remained in the rear. The front everyday life of miners began. During January and February 1944, the battalion continued to cover the distant approaches to Kiev south of Komsomolskoye and Kazatin with mines. But the German fascist units and formations were still drawing the Dnieper water to the cauldrons of the soldiers' kitchens near Kiev. And only since the middle of February, after the encirclement and destruction of a large group of the enemy in the area of Korsun-Shevchenkivsky, Kiev, became completely safe. Before, we knew almost nothing about the Bandera people. This was due to the fact that they operated mainly in the western regions of Ukraine. Only some troop detachments of nationalists were sent to the right bank of the Dnieper. But on February 29, 1944, when the battalion was ordered to be subordinated to the 4th Tank Army and was on the march in the area of Slavuta, we received sad news somewhere between Slavuta and Rivne. The commander of the front, Army General N.F. Vatutin, was seriously wounded by the Banderovites. The first meetings with the Banderites took place after the beginning of the offensive from the frontier north of Yampol. We moved by automobile following the tanks. At first the advance was relatively fast, but soon the pace slowed sharply. But it was not the enemy's resistance and not his mine blast barriers that were to blame. The main reason was the spring thaw. The hot March sun quickly melted the snow. The spring waters ran down to the narrow trench roads, designed to allow only peasants' carts to pass. The clay soil had soaked up the moisture and could no longer absorb it. The machines were slipping. Under the tracks of the 34ths formed dips, and the tanks sat tightly on the bottom. Numerous farms gospodarev were scattered among the patchwork fields, separated by boundaries. Between the fields one could see specks of tiny pine and birch groves. In the larger villages there were always intricate wooden chapels. Someone invisible behind the trees occasionally fired a few bullets at the soldiers of the battalion and immediately disappeared, as if falling through the ground. In one of the villages between Yampol and Friedrichovka we saw a large monument. Artfully built of stone, it resembled a cliff and looked beautiful in its own way. Nearby, a corpse was hanging on a pole. Around the neck of the hanged man dangled a plaque with a half-washed inscription. It was hard to make out the word, written in Ukrainian Zradnik, who was executed. What he was accused of remained a mystery to us, as the intimidated residents avoided talking. And yet, gradually we figured out some things. Fathers from the organization of Ukrainian nationalists collected taxes in these parts, appointed headmen, mobilized men to the detachments of their People's Revolutionary Army. They judged and killed every honest person who did not want to comply with the ruthless laws of the UNOFSI. Once we decided to spend the night in a small hut on a farm. When the owner, a dried-up old woman, heard our request, she began to bow to us and to the crucifix hanging on the wall. "Jesus, Mary," she cried in despair. "Go away, good people, because my father is coming. They'll burn the house." Peasants, terrorized by bandits, fulfilled any of their orders. They hid weapons and leaders, gave food and valuable things for victory. People knew if you do not fulfill the demands of the Anavites, they will shoot you or set fire to your house. During the period of thawing, when the front organized air supply for the 4th Tank Army's fighting vehicles, which were slipping in the mud, the Banderites, who did not dare to oppose the troops openly, began to hunt for cargoes, which were dropped by parachutes, away from the troop columns. Frontline events were changing rapidly. After heavy fighting with the encircled Hitlerite tank group north of Kamenets-Podolsk, our front battalion was taken out of the subordination of the 4th Tank Army. We again returned to the 18th Army, which was advancing in the Proskorovsky direction, and then reassigned to the right flank of the front. Having delayed on demining the approaches to the southern Bug and restoration of the bridge across the river blown up by Hitlerites, the company columns of the battalion followed the division's fighting orders. The day was sunny. The sky was clear, neither clouds nor enemy planes. Tired soldiers, intoxicated by the odors of spring and the joy of the offensive, were in a great mood. and suddenly on one of the road sections along the forest we were shot at with machine guns. While combing the woods, our miners captured one of the shooters, a skinny red-haired boy of about 18 years old, who looked at us with fear and blinked continuously. When he heard a question, the prisoner flinched and answered one-wordedly, stammering with fear. "What do I know? I'm from the battlefield." It is possible that he was telling the truth. As we saw later, the Ukrainian nationalists were very good at conspiracy. A few days later, south of Lutsk, we met a group of Soviet partisans who were on a short rest before another raid on the enemy's rear. One of the partisan commanders, a man in his 40s with thin features and sad grey eyes, told us, "We had to fight the Banderites more than once. It's a complicated and confusing organization. Most of them are blind executors acting under the threat of terror. A lot of things are unclear for the Onovists themselves. They have never been united. The Aun is corroded by contradictions of different groups: Bandera, Melnikov, Bulbov. Back in early 1943, the Banderites organized punitive expeditions against partisans in Zhytomyr, Rivne and other regions. At the same time, they intensively hunted for underground communists and handed them over to the German military intelligence Abwehr. And in general, in my opinion, they are closely connected with the Hitlerites." The partisan commander was not deceived by his instincts. Later, from the materials of the Nuremberg process, really became known about these ties. Circumstances were such that our battalion was forced to take part in the search and capture of the Unovci, interfering with the defense work. South of Lutsk, we received an order to transfer the battalion to the 3rd Guards Army of General V. N. Gordov, which had rejoined the front. The battalion, withdrawn from the front line, was given the task to equip, with the help of the local population, a 100-kilometre defensive line along the river Styr. They approached imperceptibly. The sun began to bake. Vapours were rising above the fields in a light haze. Swollen buds were bursting. Both greenery and people were reaching for the sun. Villagers and villagers worked in the fields. But not everyone. There were those who in those spring days hid in shelters, caches, equipped in the nearest groves or right in the underground of houses. They came out only on dark nights for dark deeds. On the day announced as the beginning of the trench work, none of the locals showed up. We went to the farms. What's the matter? They don't answer directly, they're afraid. They refer to one of their neighbours as the people, so are we. On the second day, the same story. We realized it was necessary to take urgent measures. Captain S.A. Barabashov established contact with the local authorities. Together with Senior Lieutenant N.A. N. Koklov, they travelled on horseback through numerous villages and farms spread among the forests and fields from Lutsk to Beresteko. The officers had a heart-to-heart talk with the people, found out their mood, encouraged them, and the peasants went to work. Some of them even hinted at where to look for the Banderites. The local authorities, with the help of the few military units and the population station nearby, conducted raids. Senior Lieutenant Koklov, with one platoon of the battalion, also participated in the search for Invisible. His men managed to extract a big thug into the light of day. They found him on one of the farms deep under the stable. Only an experienced eye of a mineral could notice a small defect in the camouflage. Through the hatch the soldiers got into the underground. There, between the pickle barrels, was a barely noticeable climb to the lower tier. Fresh air entered the hiding place through a board ventilation box. Above the surface of the ground, this box turned into a pillar with a hole burned inside. I had to hand it to you. The camouflage was excellent. Blinded by the bright light of the electric lantern, the Banderovite was confused and did not have time to use weapons. At that time, the units of the Anovci went to the forests near Brody, but some Banderovites did not go either underground or into the forests. During the day they managed in the field, and even treated the soldiers with homemade food. At night they were looking for a victim, which could be dealt with in a bandit way. They would kill an officer or a soldier with a shot from around the corner, or capture a contact. The bandits were especially persistent in hunting for military uniforms and documents of servicemen, so that it was easier to hide from persecution, as well as to commit robberies and violence, attributing them to the Red Army or partisans. Encounters with the Unovists continued in the area of Cherny Las, near Zbarash, where battalions of the 42nd Independent Engineer Brigade were later withdrawn for reforming and motorization. The forest near Zbarash was indeed gloomy. The green on the tall trunks of hornbeams and oaks glinted with metal. The age-old trees had closed their crowns and sparingly let the sun's rays through, and this black forest became synonymous with the forests where the Banderites hid. But the forests along the defensive line did not remain black for us for long. When in the area of the battalion's work along the River Star we caught 20 Banderites, the locals gladly reached out to us, became our active helpers. Girls and women began to work together. Then the boys and elderly men with their shovels and bundles with food started to come. Soon along the eastern bank of the River Star ran winding trenches, carefully inscribed in the terrain. The defensive work on the frontier was in full swing. Desperate counterattacks of SS tank units in the area of the town of Brody gave the troops a lot of trouble. These events just coincided with the moment when our 207th Obis came to the front line north of this settlement. The battalion was thrown on the move to mine the defence section of the 524th Infantry Regiment of the 389th Infantry Division in the area of Lubakovka. During the period from April 21st to April 23rd, 1944, we all worked with inhuman tension. Finally, the enemy was exhausted. But we were also exhausted. As soon as the situation was diffused, we fell on the ground under the oak tree. However, I did not have to sleep. I was soon awakened. The commander was called to the headquarters of the compound. Usually when I was to receive a task, Mysyakov took me with him. But this time I had to go alone. Fyodor Vasilievich was wounded, and I temporarily took command of the battalion. It was then, in April, that I first heard in the headquarters about the participation in the battles near Brody of the Ornev S Rifle Division Galicia. Dressed in Hitler's uniform, the soldiers of the division with a trident sewn on their sleeves took up the defence together with the units of the 13th Army Corps of German General A. Golfe, who was later captured near Brody, captured Galicians, who surrendered to us on July 22nd near Zolochiv, told us that the formation of the division was painful and lasted more than a year. Young guys volunteers were persuaded and intimidated for a long time, and many were simply mobilized. The staffing of the division was never finished. In the Brod's cauldron, together with 8 Nazi divisions, the SS Division Galicia ended its short existence. Among the Galicia prisoners, taken by our battalion, there was a very young boy who cried, afraid that he would be shot. At first he was surprised at everything Onov's Batkas Brahali about the Chervona army. Then he calmed down quite quickly and finally concluded it's true what they say. If you want to live a good life, you should be a fascist. So, our battalion was a participant in the defeat of the Aun compound, which was supposed to symbolize the twinning of Ukrainian bourgeois nationalists and German fascists. A month and a half had passed since then. The rainy September began. Quickly changing front events overshadowed the skirmishes with the Banderites. The 207th OMIB was already 200 kilometers away from Zolochev and was engaged in mining on the direction of Hitlerites' counterattack in the area of Sanok. Once, coming to the staff car, which was camouflaged in the bushes of a mountain cleft, I saw the deputy commander on political part, Lieutenant Colonel A.M. Boyarkin. "Well, Captain, I was beginning to worry," interrupted my report Lieutenant Colonel. "No commander-in-chief. The battalion was left without a head. A month ago I would have suspected the Banderovites, if it was not their handiwork. I went to the companies with the commander. Things are hot, and I think the Banderites are long gone." Not quite so. Only now we can say we're finished. And Anatoly Mikhailovich Boyarkin told that in August 1944, after our troops went west, the Onovtsi again raised their head. They began to brazenly attack officers and soldiers, Soviet and party workers, and in some areas tried to disrupt conscription into the Red Army, grain procurement, organized raids on the rear army units. Bandits managed to blow up several railroad bridges and echelons with military cargoes. At that time, the Military Council of the First Ukrainian Front made a decision to liquidate the nationalist gangs. Only many years later I could read that, as a result of this operation, conducted from August 22nd to September 7th, 1944, 36 armed gangs, numbering about 4,500 people, were destroyed. After the defeat of the gangs, the leaders of the Aun fled abroad. Stepan Bandera tried to send his agents to the Soviet Union and direct them from West Germany. In 1959, he was killed on a street in Munich. And his closest associate Stetsko Amovich is still swarming in 1964. In Sweden, he demonstratively laid a wreath on the tomb of Charles XII, an ally of Hetman Ivan Mazepa, in 1967. In Canada, he led a hostile demonstration in front of the Soviet embassy. The bandits' fate. The fate of the Banderovщина was decided once and for all back in 1944. The sun broke through the Black Forests,